Don Mazzella here again for Small Business Digest. We all try to figure out how best to sell our products. Well, I think Nikki Blacksmith has some ideas for us, and she's joined us today. Nikki, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Nikki, as we ask all our guests, first tell us a little bit about your own personal background, then your company, and I know you have a new book that just came out, and finally where people can get it. Let's start with your personal first.
Sure. I'm an industrial organizational psychologist, which sounds like work, but it's personal to me because that's where I've spent the last 20 some years of my life. Um, that means I have focused on understanding how humans behave in the workplace so that we can make the workplace better, increase employee well-being, and increase organizational performance. My specialty is really on the pre-employment space and assessment. So understanding how to measure people characteristics, and thinking about recruitment, hiring, and more recently, like assessing teams pre-investment. I went to grad school and got my PhD at George Washington. So I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C. For 15 years, actually. And I recently just moved to Chicago, Illinois, which is where I grew up. So it's kind of back home, but it's also brand new world for me, missing D.C. a little bit. What else can I tell you?
Name of your company and how people can learn more.
Sure. So the name of my company is Blackhawk Behavior Science. We can learn more at Blackhawk with an E at the end, .io, blackhawk.io on our website. And we also have a LinkedIn page and an Instagram where we post lots of information that is free for our audience, how to really improve human capital. We write a lot of blogs, we do podcasts. So hopefully they can find some material that is useful and helpful for them, for your listeners.
Okay, so let me back up. I guess my introduction is somewhat wrong. You're more focused on finding the right people and hiring them. Am I hearing that right correctly?
Yeah, so my focus and what Blackhawk does is we help investors analyze and assess teams during the due diligence phase. So it's similar to hiring because you're asking an underlying question of, will this person or people perform in the future in a way that I'll get a return on my investment? So instead of a salary, it's just much higher stakes because it's a larger financial commitment. But the process is the same. Understanding what are the factors that make somebody successful in entrepreneurship and on a team. So we look at the collective team, and you know, a lot of people get a little worried when I start talking about this because they're like, oh, maybe I'm not right to be an entrepreneur. Or, I don't want to take your assessment because I'm afraid that I'll say that I'm not good. Well, that's really not what we do at all. There's no one single profile that defines a successful entrepreneur. It's really about the collective team. Do they have the right team in place that can accomplish all the necessary moving pieces that it takes to get a startup off the ground? For example, one of the things that we see a lot for early stage startups is that there's often a couple co-founders and they're very visionary, have lots of ideas, very charismatic. They get people excited about their product. They, get people to come join their team, but they're not always the best people to sit down and execute. That requires a different skill set. So we can help analyze a team and say, you know what, if you're going to invest in this company, great, but you should know that there is a risk inherent without having somebody who's going to do the nitty-gritty day in and day out. And so we can, have that dialogue, and that way the investor can go to the team and say, we're really interested, we want to invest, but this is a major risk. So let's talk about how we're going to deal with that upfront in the negotiation process before they invest. So, it depends on the investor, what they want to do, but they could, say, we're not going to invest until you bring another co-founder on that can, manage the operations, or we're going to invest, but that's the first thing we're going to help you do and support you in the process of finding the right person for that. And so that way there's a lot of transparency and openness about what strengths and weaknesses the team has and what that will mean for the future growth of that startup. A lot of times, you'll see co-founders that they got together because they're friends and they worked together before. And so they have similar skill sets. And that's a problem because starting a company takes a lot of different skill sets. So if they have the same skill sets, then there's gaps in a lot of other areas. So we really coach around how to find complementary skill sets that can accomplish each of the necessary dimensions of starting a business, like marketing, finance, operations, business development. But then there's another psychological layer of, are these people going to get along? Are they going to be able to deal with conflict with one another? Is this team a good psychological fit for the investor? A lot of times we hear investors say, we invested in the startup, the idea was great. 6 months down the line, we find out the founder is just not the right fit for us. We find it really difficult to work with this person or these people. And they're frustrated. That's something that we can help them identify up front, as we can uncover, the psychological aspects of the team.
Well, let me stop you right there. Let's back up a minute. You have a founder. He or she owns 100% of the company, just to start. They come along and they say, we'll say Miss Jones for the sake of argument, you're going to have to give up a portion of your money, of your company, in order to find someone to do the nitty gritty. And he or she says, no, because to me, having been in this field myself, I found that the biggest hurdle to anything is getting people to give up some of their money or some of their control.
Yeah, it comes down to ownership, the power, the control. Absolutely. In that case, there's lots of different options. So they might not need to make that person a co-founder. They could just hire somebody that works for them. The issue with that is a lot of startups early stage don't have the ability to provide a competitive salary for executives. So that's why it comes down to the co-founder. Often it's that, little a trade-off between, having ownership and a lower salary, or the founder has to go and find the funding to actually be competitive to hire somebody that's, going to excel in that role.
Well, but let me back up and say, but down the road, that person who has in effect made the company because he or she has done the hard hauling that needed to be done is sitting there without part of the success.
Mhm.
And I've seen that happen.
Yeah.
How did I'm concentrating too much on it only because I've seen it in
Yeah.
some instances, this exact thing, where the real person that made the company grow was not properly rewarded and in fact destroyed the company.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible, and that's something we spend a lot of time on up front is the co-founder dynamic. It comes down not only to, the things I talk about, skill sets and, the psychological components, but also the negotiation of how is this company going to be operated? How are we going to share rewards? And it's up to the person that's hired to recognize that they're going to be putting in a lot of work. So if they don't fight for their part of it, um, they signed up and they agreed to that early on, which sounds harsh, but when it comes down to co-founders, having those conversations early, up front, and documented will save so much conflict in the long term. So we really encourage co-founders to create operating agreements of like what is expected of one another. How long do you have to be with this company to get a part of the company? So maybe they only came a year, they helped it grow, but then they left and the company still has another few years to really become more established. So really, they were only there for a short time. Should that person be considered a co-founder? There's no right or wrong answer here. It really comes down to encouraging the co-founders to have that honest and transparent conversation before they agree to work together. And there's so many issues we could go through with co-founders. We're actually, my co-founder and I'm on my third co-founder. So I've experienced the trials and tribulations of finding somebody who can commit to the entrepreneurial journey alongside me. But we talk often about how our next book is going to be on co-founders and how to find the right co-founder and how to manage co-founder conflict, because it really is just like a marriage. You're working with somebody day in, day out, and you have to be, you have to trust one another. You have to communicate what's happening, and you have to have an understanding of like the ownership and the power and the control, like who gets to make the decisions, because that's really when the conflict starts, is when comes down to decision making and they might not agree. So who gets the final call?
Well, before we go further, what's the title of your new book and what it's about?
Sure. It's called Data Driven. It's a very long title. Data Driven Decision Making in the Entrepreneurial Ecosystem, Tools for Maximizing Human Capital. So the book is a collection of chapters that each identifies an area of how data can be used to make more objective decisions around people. So things like hiring, the new employees, determining, diversity and inclusion and how to measure and encourage that in organizations, measuring organizational performance using data other than financial, because there are indicators of organizational health that, such as, employee well-being. If your employees are quitting all the time, that's going to affect your operations in the long term. So having an understanding of different aspects, and we provide examples and tools or ideas of how to use the data to improve organizational performance. The premise of the book, if I had to sum it up, would be that people need to come first when starting a company. A lot of the models and strategies towards the startup are all focused on product development these days. So get that lean product out. But if you take a step back, you can't really have an amazing product unless you have amazing people to build it. So it's really going to the root cause of where does that performance come from? And it comes from the people. The people have the ideas, they build the products, they sell the products, they do everything. So it's all about people if you really want to succeed. And this isn't news to any investor or anything. We work with a lot of them, and I've never heard somebody tell me something other than the people of what the most important decision factor when they're making an investment. What's the um, deal breaker, and it always comes down to the people. People are important, and a lot of times I'll hear investors say things like, we want to invest in an A team and a B idea instead of a idea and a B team. Or, we want to invest in the person. The idea is going to change and evolve over time. So really where we're focused is the people. So they know this. This is not news. What is different is the ability to capture that with data. People are very seemingly unpredictable. And so it's hard to understand how to predict how they'll perform. But with data, you can actually predict how they do.
When you say data, what type of data are you talking about?
Sure, there's all sorts of data. So we focused on one aspect of human capital. So does the team or the person have the right like psychological makeup to accomplish whatever task that they are in charge of. So I'll give myself as an example. I'm one of those visionary founders with lots of ideas. And I think very in the abstract, I think in the long term, I think in the future. Um, and that's great because we need that. But I also needed a co-founder who could bring me back to the ground and say, okay, this idea is great, but here, how are we going to accomplish it? What's the strategy? What's the plan moving forward? What are, goals, and really pull it down. Um, Actually, when I first started, one of my co-founders was like, okay, enough with the ideas. I can't handle them. They're too much. You have a new idea every 5 minutes and we need to focus. And so really it's about understanding the traits. So I am very future oriented. I am an abstract thinker. I'm a systems thinker. I am also very conscientious and organized. So you can identify those traits that match the position that the person is trying to go into. So those are human capital characteristics. We measure work styles, like how's somebody going to work? Are they structured, unstructured? Thinking styles, which is really important for entrepreneurship because a lot of it is, cognitive. You're thinking and coming up with new ideas and thinking about strategy and reviewing and analyzing lots of information at a time. So things like um, systems thinking, logical reasoning are important. We also measure grit. So how will this person deal with the trials and tribulations of the entrepreneurial journey? Are they resilient? Are they persistent? Then we also measure social emotional characteristics like emotional intelligence. Many people are familiar with that one. How are they going to work on a team? And then motivators, what motivates this person? Some founders are motivated by money, and that can be useful for somebody to know, like how to get them to keep going. Others are more intrinsically motivated, passionate about the idea. So it can help identify, who is fit for what role. The other kind of data would be like team level data. So is this team cohesive? Do they have psychological safety where they feel like they can make mistakes? Or is there a culture of fear? Is this team, do they have good communication? And then we can also measure organizational level data. So, what are the cultural values in this organization? So it really depends on at what point in the process you are gathering data and what you're using it for. But there's lots of different ways my whole career has been focused on how do we measure things that we can't tangibly see or exist, but still make a huge difference, like organizational culture. That's something that's very amorphous.
Well, to me, what I see happening is that if someone has been successful with one, they're very easy to get the second idea funded and the third idea. But what to me seems to be the tough part is the people who haven't been successful before or haven't had a new idea, but suddenly come up with one, creating a new widget that. But it seems to me that the VCs that I've run across over certainly the last 5 years have almost said, well, if you haven't been successful before, I don't want to talk to you. I'm seeing more and more of that and talking to more and more people on this program. Is that something you see?
Yeah, I see that all the time and I completely disagree with it. um,
You
I think
disagree? Good.
I, I disagree because experience is something that can be learned and taught, knowledge, skills. Um, why we measure the human capital traits are they're much tougher to teach. So for example, we measure how coachable is this founder? Are they going to take advice and like basically like listen to what the investors think or are they going to just say, this is my idea, I'm going to move forward. What you say doesn't matter. Those are things that are much more difficult to teach. Experience can be provided. You can give those founders those opportunities to get that experience, give them mentors, give them coaches. Those are the kind of things that are controllable. So they're, I think, of less importance when you're assessing early stage startups. And another example is, when I used to work for Gallup, and there was a study that they did to look at, does the human capital or talent predict more like the performance, or does experience predict performance? And what they found is that experience predicted performance, but only in the very, very early few months of the job. And then it kind of stagnated. But the talent increased and was able to predict who was going to perform. And for that reason, it's because you can gain that knowledge and experience over time. It's not something that is innate or that's, part of the person. So it's something that, although I think it surely has merit, people have experience, know what mistakes not to make, right? But they can also learn that over time. It doesn't necessarily mean because they've had experience that they're going to be successful or not successful.
That's very true. But in order to get that experience, they need the money from the VC. If the
Right.
VC says, "I'm not about to give it to you because you haven't been successful," it's like a vicious cycle. But
It is a vicious cycle.
let me throw something else at you. 2 years ago, I attended a pitch session, and there were 12 pitches made and each of the pitches had 4 people on the stage. So 48 people on the pitches. And of that, there were exactly 2 women of the 48. Okay, that was 2 years ago. Now, last month, March, I went to the very same pitch platform, and it was improvement. There were 4 women. Okay, well, and I thought, what do you say to that? And is there a bias in the industry too?
Yeah. That's actually why I started Blackhawk. I was doing my postdoc studying cognitive bias and decision making at the Army, and I came across a statistic that basically says exactly what you just shared, that 97-98% of the funding is going to men, primarily white men and primarily in Silicon Valley. And as a psychologist that studied the prediction of performance, in the hiring space, that would be illegal, right? Hiring 97% men is illegal in the United States. So I was very blown away that this was even possible. And so I started digging into understanding how the decisions are made. And what I learned is that a lot of investors require a warm introduction, which means that they know somebody in their own social network that knows them. So already you're getting that social network bias. You're only able to invest in the people that are closely connected to you. Another thing was they used reference calls and unstructured interviews, which are some of the least predictive methods of performance. And it came down to basically, this other investor invested, so therefore I'm going to invest. And I hear that a lot, that the follow-on investors, they rely on the first investor and they assume, that the person's going to succeed because this other investor believed in them. Well, that's how you get situations like Elizabeth Holmes, and how she had an increasing amount of investors. But so I started the company because I'm thinking, there's room to make 2 big pieces of impact. One, let's refocus the process and conversation of due diligence on the factors that actually predict performance, not who's in your social network. So we're getting founders that are more capable, and that also creates a standardized process that's more fair. So it's not who's in your network, but does this person have the qualifications to succeed? And so it shifts the conversation to not only help investors perform better in their portfolios, but also to give opportunities to other founders that might not be able to get that warm introduction, might not have that. There's still certainly a lot of bias. I hear, people say a lot of times they don't want to bring on a female co-founder because they're worried that she's going to get pregnant and leave after a year. There's a lot of myths and beliefs, and part of my mission is to dispel those beliefs and help investors focus on the factors that matter the most to performance.
But let me ask you a fundamental question. It was thrown at me when I pointed this out once to this group. But there are inherent differences between the way women think and men think. I know that's heresy, but I happen to believe it's true. Women think differently than men, but how do you, when you're evaluating a team, take into that, take into consideration that particular question?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think there has been a lot of research that shows there's actually absolutely no difference between women and men in the way they think or perform until you start layering on societal norms and the experiences they've got and opportunities they've got that have built them to think in a certain way or act in a certain way. So those are not necessarily like innate to the person or the gender or sex. And it certainly can be changed. We can teach people how to think, from a business mindset, are the business unit economics appropriate here? One thing that the research shows a lot in terms of differences between men and women is that women sometimes are seen to be more caring and empathetic, and think about that social aspect, which shouldn't be discounted, because running a startup means leading a team and motivating others and understanding people. And so that can actually be a huge contribution to startup success. But yeah, I would say a lot of it comes down to where society has trained us to think. It's not inherent in the person, and we can teach people to think differently, but understand and just be aware of how people get, it's a system. We live in a system, and
Let me throw a curve at you with one, only because this when I look at like Mary Barra, the head of GM, and they are inherently, to me, much stronger women than most men. I mean, they what is it? They have to be twice as good to be half rewarded, etc. But to be successful in business, it seems to me it requires a differing attribute for women. I'm married to a Harvard MBA, so okay. Believe me, she's not a shrinking violet. Um, but I just there's such a difference in what a woman is expected to be and what she needs to be in business that sometimes it seems to me it's a very difficult transition.
It is a difficult transition, and speaking as a woman myself, I feel like sometimes I do have to work a little bit harder. And I've gone from male-dominated industry to another male-dominated industry, academics, military, and now in the venture capital space. And I certainly feel, that the different in treatment. Sometimes I joke with my co-founder, he's a man, and said, you might just have to, do this, bro to bro. And expect better outcomes or more response if we put him front and forward, which I hate doing, but it's the reality of the situation. So, people have to navigate and understand what they're dealing with. But, I'll give you an interesting story about the perceptions of women and men. There was a study that analyzed VC's conversations about during the due diligence phase. And let's say there's a man that was very assertive and a woman that was very assertive. So they have the same trait, right? But the investors talked about the man as he's a go-getter, he's gonna get out there, and the woman was kind of bitchy, a little bit like arrogant. Um, and so, a lot of it comes down to our perceptions and what we see, and a lot of it's media. When you see what an entrepreneur looks like, you see things like Mark Zuckerberg, and you know, you know, everything we see influences the way we perceive the world. So helping people just be aware that those biases occur unconsciously, because that's just how we've learned to intake information, can help alleviate some of those, but also be aware that, there is a truth and reality, unfortunately, to the fact that women have to navigate the world a little differently, and have maybe a little bit of a tougher skin to stay in the game.
Nikki, I have to tell you, this is the longest I've ever done a show because you've been very interesting. So, please tell us how your website again and how people can find your book.
Sure. You can find our book on our website, Blackhawk with an E, blackhawk.io, or connect with us on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'd love for some listeners to reach out and ask questions. You talked for a long time because this is stuff I love talking about. So if people have questions or want to follow up, I'm available to chat. It's like I said it early, and this is my passion. This is my life. I love thinking about, people and how they're different and how they can, reach their highest potential.
Well, on that note, say thank you, Nikki. Have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me.